in context, why El Salvador is showing strong trends both in Latin America and the world abroad. So, to give us this visual presentation, we have Fran Strajnar, correct? Good enough, okay. Anyway, give it up for Fran. Thank you.
Hola, can you hear me? Perfect. My name is Fran Strajnar. I'm the founder of Vulcan Capital Partners. It's great to be here today. I know it's been a very long couple of days and there's a lot of hungover people here, so I'll try and keep it entertaining. For the last couple of years, I've been looking at the uber macro, trying to understand where we can not just survive, but also thrive in the apocalypse. I kind of semi-mean that literally, because the world's coming to a pretty significant inflection point. Unless you've been living under a rock, several threads are kind of coming to a head, right? So I want to open your minds to larger time frames and more macro thinking, and then describe why this country is so important, and then what I'm doing here. Money is broken. We've been lied to about everything. History is a rich tapestry of criminal money plots, basically. I call this the fiat minds virus. Give me control of a nation's money supply and I care not who makes its laws. Somebody famously said a long time ago, who hasn't worked a day in their life in multiple generations. So just to dive into a bit of a temporal marker, 2,000 years of money in 11 minutes. We all know that reserve currencies, global reserve currencies, don't last forever. They last between 100 and 300 years apiece. But this time is different. We're not just moving from one fiat currency to a new one as a global reserve. We're moving to, we've separated money from state. This is as important as the separation of church from state that led to the Reformation and the Renaissance and improved, quality of life and all kinds of innovation. The innovation that's coming out of Bitcoin, or the idea of Bitcoin, moving away from the idea of fiat currencies, is it's hard to describe. You need to put time and effort into really understanding it. So going right back, right, in 64 AD, Marcus Cicero, he was a pretty smart guy. He had a couple of interesting things to say. The budget should be balanced. The treasury should be refilled. Public debt should be reduced. And the arrogance of officialdom should be tempered and controlled, and the assistance of foreign lands should be curtailed, lest the republic becomes bankrupt. The people must learn to work instead of living on public assistance. I mean, doesn't this remind you of a few things today, like basic universal income, universal basic income, central bank digital currencies, and things like that? So, the Romans had sound money. They had 100% silver coinage. And somebody at some point, obviously after Marcus here, decided, you know what, let's just make it like 98% silver. Let's put a little bit of tin in there because we can't finance this, that, and the other. And we'll just dilute and it'll be fine, right? And is this the origin of fiat as a concept? Because once the door was opened, it created an entire system and culture and ideology that, it's now okay to basically rob future generations for short-term gains. The coinage in the Roman Empire was arguably the world's slowest rug pull. They got away with it because it took so long. But eventually it was like 0% silver, and, well, we all know what happened to the Roman Empire, right? I'm not really going to talk much about the Khazarians. You're going to hear all about them in the following months and years, but they play a critical role in the concept of, this whole Babylonian money magic that we call fiat currency. More interestingly, and I want to highlight this because it's slightly more relevant to today, there's this chap called William II in 1888. Now, he is arguably the grandfather of espionage, possibly set up the world's first signals intelligence operation as well. He had spies in all the different royalties across Europe. He was able to use information warfare to his advantage to basically steal and manipulate currencies and trade and settlements and land disputes. And it wasn't just software, it was kinetic, obviously, as well back then. And so this is the late 18th century, but several famous figures throughout history have warned us about basically fiat currencies and centralized control over money issuance. Andrew Jackson was a very interesting guy. Many of you probably know the history there. I'll just read this quote. I have had men watching you, talking to the banks, for a long time, and I am convinced that you have used funds of the bank to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you win, you divide the profits amongst yourselves, and when you lose, you charge it back to the bank. You're a den of vipers and thieves, and I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. If the people only understood the rank injustice of our money and banking system, there would be a revolution before morning. Right? Doesn't this also remind you of some themes and threads happening today? I think right now, for the first time in decades, normal people everywhere around the world are starting to say, why? Why are we in the system? Like, no one is old enough that's alive today to have lived outside of a debt-based, inflation-prone central bank money system. So they cheated him out of the election. He spent 4 years rallying the people. He got re-elected 4 years later, and then he revoked the second central bank charter. And ever since then, up until 1913, the labor that people produced and earned monies with wasn't siphoned off with the application of inflation. Right? So there was sound money in America, at least, for some time. Now, this is a contentious point, but very important. In 1871, Congress passed an act to provide a government for the District of Columbia. This is done completely outside of the Constitution of the United States, and it effectively created a country within a country. They have their own rules, their own laws, their diplomatic immunity. It's very similar to the City of London or Vatican. And these structures, they're coming to an end. They have to go, right? If anyone's interested to understand how legally under international law this can be rid of, you should read Section 11 of the heavily updated 2016 Department of Defense Law of War Manual. I bet there's only one guy in this room that's read that. Two. So when these talking heads talk about, oh, it's a danger to our democracy, and it doesn't even matter what the subject is, what they're actually referring to is their private country within a country called Washington, D.C. America's a constitutional republic with democratic elections. Who here has read The Creature from Jekyll Island? Oh, awesome. I mean, G. Edward Griffin's seminal work is probably one of the best descriptions of the circumstances and events that led to the creation of the third central bank. Obviously, this is going completely against what Andrew Jackson tried to put in place and clean up in America. And America being the only country with a constitution that's by the people, for the people, is significant for the rest of the world. If America falls, we enter into a 1,000-year technocratic dark age. And we all know what happened since the 1913 third central bank charter was issued. Right? They siphoned off all the purchasing power over a long period of time. I mean, there's this great website called WTF happened in 1971.com. And this is the chart at the top. And basically, I mean, I've skipped over the war reconstruction in the 40s with the Marshall Plan and how that created and spawns effectively shadow banking and Eurobonds, for those that know what that is. And every kleptocrat and lunatic on the planet that hides their wealth, they do it for something called offshore discretionary funds, Eurobonds, and the shadow banking system. All of that's going out the door, right? This is Rome all over again. And so wages have not kept up with asset prices since 1971. We started the clock, right? There's no more kicking the can down the road. We've had, what, 40-something years since 71 of this kind of end game that we're now really entering in. In 2008, during the financial crisis, we saw the ushering in of quantitative easing, where it's like, oh, we'll just print a little bit. You know, what's $1 trillion between friends? Well, we'll bail out some banks. In fact, we'll bail out some foreign banks as well. And then, of course, that, like the Romans, opened the door to endless money printing and the complete and total fraud that is COVID, unleashed trillions of dollars into the money supply, and things have just greatly accelerated since then. I mean, look at the cumulative inflation since 1913. This is theft. And it's got to go, and it is going, and it will go. And they will use any excuse possible to just kick the can down the road and spend more, print more, and it goes into big projects like the high-speed rail network in California. Is what, billions of dollars overdue and years overdue, and there's what, 2 kilometers of track laid? It's just nepotism and kleptocracy. So you know, we really are getting close to the end game of private debt-based central currencies. The system of temptation, of espionage, collusion, all of that, you know, we're really getting to that kind of crunch point very shortly. There is no more room to kick the can down the road. They can't print more, they can't raise rates, they're stealthily doing both. The Fed's broke. The Fed used to repatriate profits back to the US Treasury on a regular basis. And since 2022, basically, the United States Federal Reserve is being intentionally stuffed full of debt that it can never repay. And who cares? Because fuck those shareholders. Excuse my French. There's an inflection point coming. What's the rest of the world doing, right? So, sorry. I mean, seriously, the BRICS nations were nothing a few years ago, and then thanks to a stage 2 dementia patient pretending to be the president of America, projecting complete weakness into the world with the most disastrous foreign policy we've seen in decades, now is finally the door has been opened for countries to trade and settle between themselves, back their currencies with hard assets like gold and other productive assets. They set up their alternative to the London Bullion Exchange. Like 2 hours ago, I saw a message that 1 ounce of spot gold in Shanghai is $2,030, whereas the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is about $1,930. So there's billions of dollars being siphoned in physical delivery from the West into the East right now. It's, I would not be surprised that gold just doubles in a very short period, which would totally destroy the old system. They've built an entire alternative to the SWIFT network, the IMF, the World Bank, even the United Nations to an extent, and they've signed a multitude of defense pacts and trade agreements right across Africa, across Southeast Asia, India, Russia, so on and so forth. I mean, it doesn't matter what you think of the leaders of these countries. The fact is that this is happening, right? The de-dollarization is accelerating. It is here. And we are now experiencing and living through the global restructuring of a unipolar liberal world order, or a rules-based order, like whose rules, who set those, into what I hope is a much fairer multipolar order, right? And they're accumulating gold like there's no tomorrow. I couldn't find a more recent chart, but I assure you that the physical deliveries have exponentially increased since Q3 2022. Like, they know what's going to happen. And all you have to do is look around. I mean, the Japanese bond market is just hilarious at this point. And so what we can expect in different parts of the world is regime changes, currency debasements, populist revolts, sovereign debt defaults, kinetic and soft war. This is like, whether you call it 120 years or you call it 2,000 years of kind of fiat mind virus thinking of, well, we'll just make something out of nothing, charge interest on it as a private institution, and, you know, like, you've all been red-pilled and orange-pilled. So what's important is that right now, over the last few months, the boomerang, they went too hard with COVID with the lockdowns and mandates, and basically there's now a massive boomerang in terms of sentiment. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? So people are starting to understand, like, wait, my father or my grandfather, they worked hard, and they got a job, and they had holidays twice a year. Like, I can't even make ends meet. Like, what's going on here? How can this be possible? How can society be structured in this way? And so that perception change is extremely important. There's only 2 ways to kill an idea, right? I like the pseudoscience of memetics, where you can appropriate and give qualities to ideas, such as like stickiness, virality, self-replication, so on and so forth. The only way to kill an idea is that everyone stops thinking about that idea forever. So, I mean, that would take an asteroid, and then we got bigger problems, right? The other way is to transmute the idea. So how do you do that? Well, right now in Congress in the United States, finally there's a bill being discussed seriously to audit the Fed. How pissed is the public going to be when they discover what's been going on behind the scenes? I mean, we know this. We know what they've done. But when the public finds out, it's game over. These people won't be able to walk down the street. We'll never have fiat garbage again. So, look, I'm a pessimistic optimist. I think things are going to get biblically worse, and we have to. We have to go to the precipice as a species before we have the will to change. But then it's going to get a lot better. There's going to be positive, productive reconstruction as we eradicate these parasites from our society forever, right? This isn't a 100-year change. This is the biggest change in 2,000 years minimum. So, it's the end of the road. Time's up. 2024 will probably be the most difficult year in human history. Prepare yourself psychologically, mentally, spiritually, etc. The chaos will not be evenly distributed. It's extremely difficult as a macro investor to understand exactly how it will unfold and where, right? But what we can know with high certainty is that there's going to be pockets of the world that thrive. The pockets that are not experiencing the chaos that is coming to the likes of Europe, North America, and the entire Commonwealth system. And one of those places is here. So I spent an awful lot of time researching for a couple of years now, from Zanzibar to Switzerland to El Salvador. And then it was like 6 months ago, I said to my wonderful wife, Grace, like, we got to go. I can't deal with the woke stuff anymore. We got to go. And, you know, the social contracts have been broken. The global restructuring is underway. And so, do you want to be in a country that's going like this, deindustrializing and everything else? Or do you want to be in a country that's going like this, right? And so it's a very simple equation. We thought, let's move to a country that's on the up and up, and let's use the best of our skills and knowledge and resources to co-create prosperity in a country that's going to experience less chaos than the rest of the world. And look at the bonds here, right? Bonds go up for two reasons. One, things are very, very bad in a country. Two, things are very, very good in a country. I encourage Bukele to continue trolling the international community as he has 2 days ago. A clean house is very important. It's not fully clean here yet, but it's well on its way. This is a completely different country in just 4 years, right? So just yesterday, S&P upgraded this country. Whew. So what does this signify? I mean, like, who repays the IMF early? That was an incredible feat. The restructuring of short-term debt, which was more recent, was done sensibly. We now have a whole range of stable and sensible policies, right? Low and no income tax and foreign-derived income, or just re-registering your headquarters here as a technology or a communications company. And the total eradication of the gangs. I mean, they only lost like half a dozen military personnel and officers, rounding up 60,000 hardcore gang members. And now the people feel freed, and they can walk down the street, they can open businesses, they're not going to be extorted. Their problem is just alt, control, delete. It's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. And of course, Bitcoin is legal tender, and honestly, for those that don't understand fully, the securities framework here is second to none. It's remarkable. You can own and transact in any damn property that you want to, and, you know, don't be a scammer. El Salvador's upcoming sovereign Bitcoin bonds issuance should be the most lucrative bond issuance in over 200 years. So a lot of people are saying, when is it? Da, da, da. Like, give them time. Let them do it right. This is so important. In fact, this is so important to other countries, bigger countries, international players, international organizations, that I believe quietly they are not just rooting for this country, but they're assisting in various different ways. Because if this country can prove how to do it, how to be prosperous outside of the IMF, BIS, World Bank system, it becomes a template and a blueprint for other nations. Somebody has to set the example. I mean, this place is literally called the Savior, El Salvador. So that's why I'm excited to be here. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing here. So I've been in the Bitcoin space for a very long time. I feel like I'm part of the furniture, and we've got a lot of capital markets, investment banking, advisory experience in our team. And when I say we've been doing heavy research, I mean, like, we have just published Vulcan.capital last night, and we have published what is the greatest and most in-depth piece of research for free in decades. Everything you could possibly imagine, and I'll get to that in a second. So you keep hearing about this little country that's doing everything great. And then maybe as an investor, you go to your Bloomberg terminal and you go, oh, buy the El Salvador ETF. Doesn't exist, right? Like, it's just too early. So then you go, okay, well, go to Google, invest in El Salvador, and you'd be lucky to get like a UBS report about geothermal from 2016 or a Santander report about agriculture from 2017. It's a totally different country now, isn't it? So we hope this research report that we published is relevant and useful and informative for, you know, anyone that's interested in El Salvador. But what we want to do is we want to make it easy for billions of dollars to pour into this country. co-creation of prosperity, lift the jobs and living standards of the locals while giving great returns to foreign investors that are starting to panic. I call it panic money, right? I got a buddy in Turkey. He's got like a $20, $30 million portfolio of property, and he's wedged between the bullshit in Ukraine and the bullshit in the Middle East. And he's like, what do I do? The lira is hyperinflating. I'm like, well, obviously buy Bitcoin, but then you might want to, you know, develop some agricultural land and food security, energy security in this country that's got much better policies and stability and so on and so forth. And I know for a fact there's billions of dollars waiting on the sideline for Bukele's re-election before they commit, because they need to understand that nothing's going to change in a negative way for at least 5 years to be able to deploy significant infrastructure projects, right? So that's what we're doing. If anybody understands how Macquarie Bank works, where you have advisory at one end to structure transactions and deals, asset management in the middle to manage transactions, and funds management at the other end, that's basically what we're doing. It's a known recipe that works. It's a win-win for job creation, growth, prosperity here, and for structuring and a method in which investors are accustomed to internationally. So here's just a kind of snippet. We want to do a technology fund and a real estate fund. So we're going to have a feeder out of Bahamas, which is recognized by international investors for their asset protection and fund administration practices. And then obviously the general partner is us here. And then we deploy capital and buy assets and report upon those, and any income, yield, whatever is turned into Bitcoin in a quarterly basis and then streamed to white-labeled Bitcoin addresses to the limited partners, to the owners of the units of the fund. And so we want to tokenize it on the Bitcoin blockchain, obviously, register it as a fully fledged security, and we're in the process of applying to list it on the Bitfinex securities. So you got your wholesale out of the Bahamas, and then because we're buying illiquid assets like real estate and equity in companies, we don't want large redemptions, so it's going to be a private equity perpetual fund with a secondary market on an exchange so people can dispose of their units of the fund that way instead of calling for redemptions. Technology in this region is already blowing up. I mean, there's a lot of capital coming into various parts of Central and Latin America. So it's not just about investing into technology companies in this country. We want to bring technology to this country, right? So, for example, my friend has a company called Emrod, who figured out how to turn AC/DC into microwaves and transmit it kilometers without too much loss in electricity. Tesla's dream come true, right? So, you know how expensive and costly and all the permits you need to get a cable from some solar plant in the mountains back to the main grid? It's not easy. So we want to encourage those types of technology companies to not just offer their wares here, but to manufacture here, create employment here, and export their technology to the world from here, right? There's 3D printing, there's personal transportation drones, which I'm very excited about, but I won't try the first 2 generations. There's all kinds of fun stuff that's coming in the next decade, right? And then real estate. I mean, like, we can't convince everyone to drain their bank accounts and buy Bitcoin 100%. It's just not going to happen, right? People still want real estate. And I know they were speaking about real estate in the previous conversation. I can't do too many forward-looking statements. I can't even read some of the language here for legal reasons. But, you know, one of the first sectors after a country is reformed and goes through a transformation like it has here is that the fruits of those changes are enjoyed by the real estate sector first, right? And this country's not quite food independent. And so that's a big driver. Energy independence is very close. Food independence is critical. And why not assist that while making good returns, right? So I encourage you to go to vulcan.capital, download the report. We're a for-profit business, so we do want you to join our mailing list, and then we email you through the PDF, right? Give to get. But everything you could possibly want. Mega projects, tourism, agriculture. The reverse immigration is fascinating, right? There's 500,000 Salvadorians expected to return to live in El Salvador by 2030. Now, if they've been offshore for decades or even years, you can have a very low average of, say, 100K worth of equity in their homes. So That's $50 billion of returning capital by 2030 just from that alone, reverse immigration. And then you've got the GDP projections, which are expected to double by 2030, and that's a conservative expectation as well. So it's a fun-packed report. The world's on fire. We're going through critical structural global changes. This country is the country that's designed to do it right and show how to be a blueprint for, you know, an ethical way to govern and be prosperous and co-create value and prosperity. And I'm going to dedicate the next decade of my life to, you know, chipping away and helping be part of this journey. So thank you all for your time today, and we've got about 4 minutes for questions if anyone has any. Feel free to get in touch. Thank you, everyone.